Hello every folks, and good morning! Okay, so I wanted to talk about something that's been on my mind every now and then lately, which was the idea of an FFT remake. So this has basically all been confirmed. Everything else from the NVIDIA leaks is kind of released at this point. Probably the least likely of which was Tactics Ogre Reborn there, because it was kind of in that category a little bit like, I mean, in terms of things that have been on the mind recently, things like RE4, where they were kind of in that category of like, does this really need a remake? It's kind of peaked and gotten mods and stuff like that. But anyway, so let's kind of get into what we saw with Reborn there and what that might potentially entail when it comes to an FFT remake. Because I will say, for one thing, I don't actually know that we'll end up seeing the original director come back for that one. Given that he, in many ways, seems to be almost retiring. So I don't know if that's exactly accurate or not, but it does kind of feel like they're maybe trying to go off to greener pastures at this point. Either way, when it comes to an FFT remake, I'm pretty sure we'll end up seeing something kind of similar to Reborn, although definitely in a bit more of an expansive way. See, when it came to Reborn there, when they redid that remake there, they were still able to keep a lot of the original assets in place, like a lot of the old artwork and stuff like that could essentially be kind of like stretched out, brushed up, all that kind of thing, because mechanically there was way too much there to actually fully like remake it from scratch. It would have been ridiculous to even attempt that. But at any rate, when it comes to FFT, on a mechanical level, when it comes to the actual like assets and things like that, while I'm fairly certain the maps themselves, like I'm pretty sure I've seen somebody attempt upscaling projects on that before that went pretty well. The actual bones of the whole thing seem like they might be able to handle something like that a lot better. Namely, that there weren't like 10 billion systems layered on top of one another, and the game was fairly linear, so this essentially means that a completely ground-up remake, especially given that it seems to be taking the longest of all of these remakes so far, is probably not out of the question. And not to mention, I really hope they don't attempt to simply reuse the PS1 assets again for that one, because that's how we got War of the Lions, and I think they've kind of taken that particular approach as far as it can reasonably go. For anyone that potentially only played War of the Lions and hasn't played the PS1 version before, please try the PS1 version. Basically, War of the Lions is one of those things where, yeah, the game is still great, it's still really good, but there's a lot of little details from the PS1 version that just never quite adequately got conveyed, and specifically I'm talking about things like a lot of the sound effects, a lot of the scenes that got redone as movies. Just, I mean, obviously everyone's opinions are going to be kind of all over the place, but personally, I just feel like they hit completely different. Like seeing a lot of those scenes happening in game, as opposed to seeing them as kind of like a whole full animated cutscene. Just, I don't know, it hit different was the thing. Like I know personally, when I was playing the PS1 version growing up, the scene at the very start where it's just the random knight getting the hell beat out of him by Wiegraf, just like, it definitely sold me on the whole concept of the game, where like the sound effects were very meaty. A lot of the impact sounds were very noticeable. A lot of the way that things were very expressively conveyed in the animations were, again, just, it felt very cathartic, I guess is the way to go. It felt very physical, you know? And that, like, a lot of that physicality, due to the way that the sound effects were redone and stuff like War of the Lions, kind of lost a little bit of its luster there. Like, a lot of the music lost some of its layers, so it didn't have some of the background support stuff going on. I remember the Meliadul fight particularly sticking out for that one. When it came to a lot of the hitting sounds, again, they just didn't sound right. Again, particularly if you've played the PS1 version before. Like, the one that I tend to bring up is the death sounds going from like a roar, like a whole like echoing screaming thing, to just like a in the War of the Lions versions. And again, they've done what they could with those assets. Like for example, the iOS version of War of the Lions just kind of showed that it could be fully 3D, and it does end up working pretty well. It does look weird in some directions, but it still could work, But again, I don't think they could really justify doing that yet again. Because one of those big issues that came from all of it was the fact that they didn't seem to want to, either weren't able to or couldn't, or didn't want to optimize it properly. So like the PSP version had extreme slowdowns that are fixable with a simple mod, yet for some reason all of the different versions always just went for a weird workaround where instead of like fixing the weird lag issues, they're just like, okay, we speed up this one section, we slow down this other section. I don't know why they did it that way. I have no theories aside from some legal jank that modders can fix it in a few hours after release, yet the devs themselves couldn't fix it in like over a decade. Again, I don't know. I have no theories as to why that's there. Hopefully somebody can enlighten in the comments. But that said, what can we potentially see out of a remake like this? Because one of those cool things that we saw when it came to Reborn is that it didn't attempt to do what the One Vision mod did. Namely, it didn't attempt to take those original mechanics and like fully flesh out every single one of them in the farthest ways that they'll go. That stuff is awesome, and again, if you want that for Tactics Ogre, the One Vision mod does that incredibly well. But it's not trying to compete with the mods. Instead, it went for trying to appeal to more folks more readily, essentially keeping the emotions of the original experience while still, while kind of expanding that wherever they could, but at the same time, mechanically, they tried to make it more understandable to everyone. So, like, for example, there were an absolute kind of ridiculous ton of passives in the original Tactics Ogre PSP, which then ended up getting removed in favor of field cards. So essentially that if you captured certain parts of the map, you ended up boosting those units in certain ways. They could carry a stack of them. It was a fun way to just sort of incorporate board game mechanics to replace what was otherwise a fairly mundane type of, well, entire chunk of the skill list. Instead of having a massive amount of skills that took a long time to set up for all of your individual parties, instead, it ended up switching over to a far shorter list that typically combined a lot of existing skills. So, for example, Overpower was a really good skill that allowed you to avoid saving roll skills, which, if you're thinking about FFT, think of those times when somebody stacked for avoidance, and think if you had a skill that had basically a chance roll to do the opposite of that. Where you could just essentially take the parry or deflect skills as they were in Tactics Ogre and just simply ignore them some of the time. On paper, that is an incredibly powerful move, but because of the fact that it didn't really have any feedback to it, most players just assumed it didn't work and never used it. So either way, stuff like that ended up getting reworked into other skills that never ended up getting used, like, for example, another skill like Vigorous Attack or Eagle Eye, which were previously just 100% hit chance moves that were kind of redundant, but instead they were reworked in a way where essentially they allow you to avoid saving roll skills. Now, that kind of stuff was done across the board, just kind of taking a lot of older stuff that nobody used, combining it with other stuff to just have it do more stuff. In the case of FFT, obviously this is going to be a very, very different system in which I feel like they're probably going to have a lot more options available to them. Simply because the overall system is a lot more open. Like, granted, on the Ogre side of things, it was more open than many realized back in the day. That kind of stuff was kind of learned over time, but really, that whole experience is one of those games where you just kind of like come back to it over and over and over. Whereas FFT is one of those that you typically will do you'll do your run for the year, and you're like, oh, that was fun, and then you'll come back to it next year. It's one of those, like, perennial kind of games. But generally speaking, you aren't doing too many back-to-back runs unless, you know, you have to be one of those that's doing a bunch of, challenge run type of stuff for it. Alright, so in terms of what might be different, I think it's fair to say that the whole reworking some of the boring passives into skills thing is pretty likely. Based on what we saw with Reborn there, like, for example, stuff like your jumps, your movement ups, and things like that, it does make more sense to combine them into items that maybe didn't get to see much use before. Like, particularly seeing stuff like a jump reworked into gloves, where instead of, you know, just making your feet spring harder, you just go and end up getting those things for particular items instead. But on paper, that also would mean that we end up losing some stuff like the Dragoon losing potentially some of its identity from having its whole kind of jump situation. Though, that being said, another thought would be that maybe some of those old systems could be once again boiled down in a way that could be a bit more fun. So for example, like you have your old class level system, right? And then you also have your JP system, which they completely got rid of that system for Ogre there, in favor of just always having them available. But a lot of the classes in TO, again, are going to have less skills available to them at any given time, and there's kind of less of an overall focus in sort of like Pokemoning your skills together, you know, just trying to make a team of skills for your people. So what I'm thinking might potentially happen there is that maybe class level is going to be used in some ways like the emblem system was from Knight of Lotus. This might be a complete crackpot theory. Again, this is just personal theories and thoughts and musings and whatever. But think about it for a second. Like, with your class level, it literally was just used for unlocks for the most part. I don't even remember if it had any other mechanics to it. It's just you've experienced this much of this class, and it's unlocked this other one. And they experimented with doing this a little bit different when it came to FFTA and FFTA2, where they're like, okay, if you equip certain piece of equipment, you get access to these skills immediately, but you have to have experience in using this skill, using this class, and whatever else to get your levels up. But what if they then either incorporated that system, or which that system was not super popular. Personally, I loved it, but again, it wasn't super popular for a lot of folks. But what if they did it a little bit of an opposite direction, where they simply made class level your way to unlock skills? Essentially did a sort of XCOM-esque thing, where like you go and you use the class in a certain way, and you could go two ways. Again, XCOM or Knight of Lotus on that, as far as I'm concerned. Where, like, on the Knight of Lotus side of things, it's like, okay, you've gone and, like, let's say you started off with a dash, right? And so you've used dash, and you've managed to get a kill with dash, and now suddenly you get access to counter tackle, because now you know that that thing has other purposes. Or maybe it's like a Legend of Mana thing, where you just have a chance to suddenly unlock that other skill when using it in a particular way. Where, like, let's say you combine your skills together. Because, again, one of those things they did for Reborn was that you could suddenly combine a lot of your previous skills. So you couldn't use Tremendous Shot and Double Shot and Dragon Slayer at the same time before, and now all of a sudden, hey, look at that, you know, friggin' over 8 times the actual health limit on a dragon just done with one shot. So there were a lot of cases where stuff could be combined in ways that it couldn't be combined before. So what if you could essentially, like, ready up some skills and then use other ones, maybe potentially combine those into new skills, and that's how you unlock new ones? Or again, we go back to the XCOM approach, where it's simply you gain a class level from using that class, and all of a sudden, hey, you have a point towards your new skill there. It might be a good way to simplify it, because a lot of those old, like, SP, JP, whatever systems generally have not stuck around as much because, well, they were frustrating to people, and in many cases it was pretty annoying to have to redo an entire second fight because you were 5 JP off. Now, the problem is, if they do get rid of that system, then inevitably there will be complaints about the next thing, which was getting rid of, like, passive learning for your different units. So, like, if you leveled up a unit as a particular class, that class experience carried over to everybody else for that particular class. They got a little bit of a sort of spillover effect. I don't know necessarily how they do that. Maybe they would just convert it into XP or something. But either way, might be a thing. I don't think we'll see as much debuff combination as we saw in Reborn, though, because FFT's debuffs tend to be a lot less redundant. So, like, for example, in Tactics Ogre PSP's case, like, they had Bind, Shackle, Stop, and a lot of skills would end up having the chance to inflict all of them. So instead, they all just got boiled into Stop. Or, like, you had Charm and Bewitch, which Bewitch was more like straight-up mind control, where a unit had to have very specific ways to be cured out of it and lost loyalty as their turns dragged on. And from a kind of like lore immersion perspective, yeah, it sure made sense that people were getting mind controlled by fairies, but for most players playing the game, it didn't really carry over particularly well. And I'm thinking we probably won't see as much of that because, again, they do tend to be a little bit more obvious in FFT's case. Like, if somebody's turned into a frog, it's pretty clear that they are now a frog. If somebody's silenced, it's pretty clear that they're silenced. But I would figure we'll probably see at least... I would expect to see at least a boil down of some of the more oddly specific ones, or at least maybe make them more available. So, like, the Zombie Forest, I was going to say maybe we'll see more of the zombie status, but honestly, it was kind of just perfectly implemented in that one. Like, it's just enough for it to be an experience, but actually, now that I think about it, I know I got completely off track here, but I'm wondering Like, if we'll end up seeing some War of the Lions stuff, like friggin' zombie, what's-his-face, you know, the asshole. Wonder if we'll see him make a comeback. I'm pretty sure we'll see some of that, though a bit of a hot take. I don't think we're going to see friggin' Luso showing up, or, like, I don't think we'll see Balthier or Luso showing up as characters, or anyone else for that matter. We might, however, see what every mod ever has done, and probably see either some ogre characters, or more likely see Ashley Riot showing up as a sort of an optional character somewhere through the story. Because, like, keeping Cloud in there totally makes sense, but I don't think we're going to end up seeing anything along the lines of, like, honestly, for newer players, who the hell remembers who Luso is? Realistically, I guarantee most folks that would be playing an FFT remake might not have ever even heard of FFTA existing. So I don't see that being likely. Same thing for Balthier. I doubt even more, you know, characters played, I think it was 12 that he was from, right? I think so. Anyway, I'm pretty sure even fewer have played that one. I mean, personally, I know I really loved loved hearing the story of the development behind that one, but have absolutely no idea about the actual game itself. I've watched more than played of that one. Anyway, so yeah, personal theory, I think it's either going to be Ashley, or it's going to be Serenoa if they want to go for a big crossover with Triangle there, or we'll see like, I don't know, maybe Denim or Canopus or somebody, like, or maybe they just won't have that encounter at all. But either way, just a bit of a thought as far as that goes. Anyway, back to the debuffs. In terms of just kind of debuff things. Actually, wait a frickin' second. On the skills and things, they realistically probably... I don't think they're going to go a Vagrant Story direction with it in particular, because we saw that for Tactics Ogre PSP. They already did that card. But, and obviously in that particular case, like, they incorporated the whole new armor system and whatever else. I mean, that really does feel like the way that they would actually logically go, though. Like, you use your weapons with a particular class enough times, and then it just unlocks a new skill in that particular direction. It just feels like the way that they're going to go. Again, just kind of going the XCOM route, so to speak. Well, I guess I mean, technically, Vagrant Story kind of did it in its own way first, if we're just picking from a list. And then I guess Parasite Eve did it. I don't know. Anyway, point being, picking from a list. That's what I'm trying to get at here. So I feel like that's probably a bit more likely than bringing back the old JP system. Equipment-wise, the equipping armor and having health serve as your armor system rather than having a full armor system in the game was really good for allowing the AI to flourish, so to speak. It had a lot less kind of tough decisions to make. So basically, it didn't constantly have to run into those issues where it was potentially having to decide whether it's worth trying to poison that guy they're going to do 1 damage to. So either way, I feel like they're probably going to stick with the no actual armor thing. Speed-wise, I'm sure they're going to have some sort of fix to that, because I really doubt that endless tailwind spam is going to be a thing again. So I'd assume that probably will get replaced with something else, like maybe allowing a multi-move on that turn or something. Just really what I would expect that they would do a lot more of is just stacking up multiple skills. So, like, for example, setting up a case where, I don't know, you combine your dash together with, I don't know, a first aid or something. Like, you do, like, let's say you have multi-actions, and you can, for example, like, you stack up a certain amount of points, and then you save your points during, you know, 1 turn, instead of just simply saving on recovery time. Essentially, you would have a potential system where, like, I guess, in a way, we're going the triangle route with this, where you would have those points, but you'd be able to use them in multiple kind of succession. There's the word I'm looking for. Words are hard. But, like, let's say you're using them in succession, where it's like, okay, you dash, and then you dash, but you also push the unit back, which then puts you in position to go do, like, a first aid on somebody else or something. I would expect to see them incorporate something more like that, where there's just a lot more physicality to it. And again, that was the kind of stuff when I was playing through the intro for Triangle Strategy, that's what I thought that they were going to be going towards, but then it ended up being a pretty basic, like, turn and action system. But again, I really should stop ripping on that game's lost potential. But anyway, So I would feel that there's definitely going to be more combinations of skills for stuff like that. For classes, I don't think we'll end up seeing any new ones aside from maybe the War of the Lions ones. In terms of cutscenes and things, I feel like they'll probably end up being in-game again. Just because if they're redoing the game, which I'm pretty sure they will be. Again, the maps are not gigantic. In terms of the number of units and whatever else, while there are a lot of classes, it would essentially all be down to just remaking those chess pieces, so to speak. Again, the reason that this wasn't possible for something like Ogre was just the fact that it was given next to no budget, and the amount of maps is eye-watering, so it was never going to happen for this one. But yeah, for FFT, especially given how much of the fact that it's been essentially printing money for them for decades, I'm sure they're going to give it an actual budget this time around. Especially since I'm sure they've been printing even more money with having them show up in mobile games and stuff like that. So I would really expect that to be a thing. Now, I would like to hopefully see more kind of active defense mechanics, though. So we saw this expanded a little bit in Reborn, where, for example, previously many folks gave up on parry because it was a fairly low chance to roll. Many didn't understand that parry showing up as the text while deflecting did not mean that parry was the only one rolling, so that had a tendency to also get not used for that reason. So I would expect to maybe see more of a situation where we're seeing like more defensive attributes to weapons themselves, like instead of parry being its own skill, again, you know, maybe some combinations with weapon types, potentially going kind of like the one vision route, as well as what other mods potentially have done, just like getting some better avoidance off of spears, or maybe making you more likely to evade or parry with a sword. Maybe like having two-handed weapons have parry built in so that they're always, you know, kind of blocking with the weapon, so to speak, instead of just attempting to dodge. Actually, no, the attempting to dodge thing was FFT-A, wasn't it? So I think they still use their weapon to block for the animation for FFT itself. But if you equipped parry, you always blocked with your weapon. It was a separate dodge chance for like parry and evade, from what I understand, which was why you sometimes blocked with your shield and sometimes blocked with your weapon. Either way, I'd expect to see more kind of stacked defense mechanics, like more stuff like parry, basically. Like maybe more defensive shield variants, maybe seeing more of like a spell dodge kind of thing, because there was already a spell avoidance thing, but there was no spell parry. So seeing a way to, like, let's say defensively slap back spells or something Dark Souls style would be pretty cool. Seeing potentially a chance to like maybe set up stances to allow for a better kind of postures against certain things. Like again, they sort of experimented with this idea in Tactics Ogre, where instead of Hamido, they changed it to Preempt, where you basically activated, or later on had an automatic chance to activate, a skill that gave you the ability to attack beforehand, and then you could sort of lean into that by giving them a knockback chance. So essentially they could attack and or crit to knock the unit backwards before getting attacked. Essentially taking the idea of Hamido, but kind of balancing it out in a more interesting way. So, I don't know, possibly an idea. Also, I would expect to see something along the lines of a Quick Draw from Tactics Ogre making a comeback. It felt a little bit iffy in Reborn, because it was essentially implemented... At first it was implemented with the wrong text that said that it was a pistol skill that caused you to attack melee units, which was not the case. It would have been really cool if it was, but it wasn't. Instead, it's essentially, if you're targeted by an archer, you shoot first. So you're doing the Indiana Jones thing, more or less. I know he had a sword in that one, but just don't question me on it. But either way, you were essentially just shooting before the other guy could draw, which is a cool idea, but you almost never see that situation come up in TO. However, you do see that situation come up in FFT a decent bit, so it would be cool to see that make a comeback, just Hamido for guns, you know. I don't believe you could use for guns. I think it was melee only. It's been a while since I kind of got into the end game of FFT, admittedly. Either darn ways, I think that might be a little bit of a cool thing to see. Also, I'd expect to see more entries from their MMO as far as other characters go. I honestly, I have zero interest in trying that game whatsoever. I don't care who the writer is, so y'all can make up your own theories on that one. I got nothing to say on their MMO. it just seems like every picture I've seen from it is either here, this is a reference to this thing, or hey, check it out, furries. So either way, not my cup of tea, but you know, it is what it is. All right. Also, I really, really hope for the FFT remake, if and when it happens, please make an online AI arena. Like, the PSP version with One Vision is the closest that I've gotten to experiencing this outside of the extremely competitive, like, original FFT AI online multiplayer scene, which it's too late to hop into that one fresh. But in terms of an FFT remake, I really, really hope they make it a proper multiplayer mode to have AIs just kind of duke it out. It's just a really fun thing to watch, and it allows for planning in a bunch of very interesting ways. So yeah, it's kind of about that there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, I would expect crossbows would be better for another thing. It would be really cool to see something along the lines of a Vagrant Story-esque, like, rapid-fire crossbow type situation, or, like, based on your brave chance, or, like, what if they brought back the risk system? Like, you can just basically risk additional attacks. That would be perfect for all this stuff, actually. Forget the points. That would be a way better way to implement all this stuff. You just increase your risk with every additional action that you take, and you just sort of glass cannon your way through fights. How would that work on a team basis? I don't know, but it suddenly would allow for kind of crossbow builds to be able to go and inflict blind on, like, 6 dudes at once for the sacrifice of your archer. That could be interesting. But it would really be nice to see a case where the death of your units was something other than a reason to reset. That was probably one of my biggest gripes about FFT. That just, like, you could start from scratch and whatever else, but it felt like it was more of a drag than it was in something like Ogre here, where the death of your units was more of a dramatic turning point in the story, you know? It's like you lost one of your special guys, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that guy got shot straight off a wall, and now I want somebody else to go replace that role, and then you rebuild him, but you rebuild him a little bit differently, and then you find this new build option. So I would hope if they are reworking the whole skill system, I really hope just faster rebuilds are part of it. Like, let's be honest, nobody really likes the grind. Like, in cases where it's actually giving you, more stats on your units or whatever else, sure. But when it comes to just seeing a unit come up from being fairly worthless to being something more worthwhile, it generally would be nice to be able to skip that phase. So who knows? Maybe they'll just implement a training mode. It did feel a little bit odd that FFT never got that, actually. It was definitely more of a focus to just continue moving forward, but I would expect that they would bring the training mode back. Again, for those that never kind of paid attention to the comparison between the two, I mean, like, it really was just back and forth between FFT and Ogre. Like, you had Ogre come out, and then they're like, we need a Final Fantasy version of this. So then they took a bunch of ideas and kind of narrowed down the scope and made FFT. And then they're like, okay, so we have a bunch of cool ideas that we couldn't implement. Let's make Vagrant Story. And then they're like, what if Vagrant Story but FFT but also Ogre? And then that's how Tactics Over PSP happened. And then they're like, wait, what if we made this actually understandable to human beings? And that's how Tactics Over Reborn happened. And then in between, you had FFTA and FFTA2 experimenting with other mechanics. So, yeah. Let's see. What else might make a comeback? Odds of the law system making a comeback. Probably nil, but it would be nice to see bonus objectives make a comeback. That's what they tried to do for Reborn, and while generally it wasn't the fanciest thing in the world, it was a nice little extra. So possibly bonus objectives might be a thing. I'd expect to see more side quests. I will say one of the things I really loved about Fellseal was being able to see all of these little kind of like mini side quests littered throughout maps throughout the entire game. So I'd love to see that kind of stuff implemented. And same thing occasionally for something like XCOM 2, where you just had like little side quest bits here and there. So I feel like they probably could do that with the hunting system, where it was a little bit kind of half-baked in the original, and just kind of like your way to get some overpowered items and whatever else. But I feel like maybe, or not even overpowered items in a lot of cases, but just kind of different items. But I feel like they probably could do something very similar, just kind of expand out on it in all directions. Again, RE4 Remake is still on the mind of just like, here's the perfect way to do a remake for everything, just expand on every idea. So that might be an idea there. Just kind of see the hunting system turn into more of a perk availability system. Probably see more defensive abilities spread out from passives into different weapon categories. It would be great to see something like shields providing immunities like they did in Tactics Ogre PSP. That, I feel, just should be a standard for everything, because shields feel like they need to be shields, not just a freaking stat bonus. I will say few things bug me in RPGs as much as shields that don't shield. Yeah, like, basically there were an increase to dodge chance, which makes sense. It makes sense, but it would be really cool for them to have more identity. Again, I know I hold up TOPSP a lot, but its original version, where it had specific immunities for a lot of older shields, felt very right, you know? Like, you had the original caster shield that gave you an immunity to silence, and then you had one shield for your ass piece, you know, your Spartan shield, and gave you an immunity to sleep, because they can't sleep being so badass. And then suddenly you had charm proof on your tower shields, because, you know, it's a little bit hard to to extend your dating pool options when you're running around, you know, Rome cosplaying. And then you had stuff like stun proof on stuff like your peltas and things like that. Either way, it felt very appropriate. Your smaller shields later made your parry odds better. Again, FFT style. You had deflect odds, which were, again, FFT style, but in a different direction. I feel like, to this day, that's probably specifically the best version. Again, I don't know why they took that out for Reborn, but whatever. It is what it is. So, those are just my thoughts on this particular thing. I know it's a bit of a scatterbrained thing at the moment. But I'd love to hear what ideas you guys think might be coming. Obviously, right now we don't have much of anything to go on, aside from what we've seen in previous remakes, which it seems, to me at least, like a lot of these newer remakes are going for that idea of keeping the feel of the original, keeping the emotions of the original, while improving the systems to something that, you know, modern-day folks might actually want to play. So yeah, and again, for its occasional criticisms, I feel like Tactics Ogre Reborn absolutely nailed that. Like, from the voice acting to the new presentation and whatever else, like, it is just solid in terms of properly conveying the emotions of that whole situation. Was I the biggest fan of the increase in kind of drop chance shenanigans in the very, 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 very post-game? No, but again, that was the very, 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 very post-game. When you have an issue with a game that happens several hundred hours in, I think it's safe to say you enjoyed yourself by that point. But either way, that'll be that. Let me know what you guys think, and yeah, have yourselves a good one. Take care. Also,